Yo, yo, yo. What is going on, team? This is Art, and today I'm going to be going over technical analysis. This is a lesson that we're doing today on the 30th of June. And basically, we're just going over the system of finding a trade and what it takes to execute out a trade. So let's get right into it. I'll just be using, various different examples that we have in terms of like Costco. We'll use JP Morgan. And basically just go over, again, what it takes to take a trade. So firstly, I just want to say that I use the 9, the 20, the 50, the 200-day moving averages. And those are some of the most commonly used ones. These are the ones that you end up seeing in the majority of people's tool sheds. And on top of that, I'll be using the MACD 2 lines, RSI, and a few of my own custom indicators. I'm having the one with the bubbles released pretty soon in terms of my coursework, and on top of that I have my visualizer, that is the bottom indicator, which fires long and short depending on whether or not the stock is following my parameters or not. So that said, I am going to be going over mainly how to read my indicators in terms of how I go about trades. That's mainly just my personal style. So I like to play on convergence, so I use MACD. I think that with MACD, you can get a pretty solid idea of what the trend is in a stock. And since I have Costco as the stock here, I'll just kind of go over what I mean by that. So basically, notice that we have MACD 2 lines right here. I'll just put a smaller time frame. Let's put on the hourly. Notice that we have these crossover events, and on these crossover events, we end up seeing these pushes or sell-offs on the stock. And you're basically using the MACD 2 lines kind of as a means of understanding when to go long or short depending on whatever the stock is. So when it comes to Costco, at least, notice that we have this MACD crossover right here on this 20 SMA bump. We're actually about to touch 400, which is another massive new all-time high for Costco. But notice that we touched the 200-day moving, the 20-day moving average, and then we end up seeing the stock push a little bit. And so pretty much what ends up happening is that with that, you have a little bit of a divergence. You have a push in terms of buying volume. And on top of that, you have the support of 20 SMA. There's that $400 mark for Costco, by the way. And so once you have that crossover, there is that extra, there's more buyers than sellers. And pretty much what you're looking at with that is also RSI. In terms of RSI, that is, again, the relative strength index. And what I try to look for is just how much strength does this stock have? Do we have way more buyers than sellers? Do we have a buy volume that is going to sustain the stock for a while? Once we have that trend change, how long can we sustain that change? And that's why I like using the hourly chart, the 5-minute. And recently I added the 1-minute just to kind of have an idea of what's up in the shorter term. So pretty much we have this MACD crossover event with that 20 SMA bump. And so we're just going to be using that in order to kind of play out these stocks. So when you have that MACD crossover, this is what we ended up taking a few days ago when I took Costco. This was because we had that MACD cross, 20 SMA bump. Now we know confirmed that we have a pretty decent uptrend. And notice that even yesterday, even though Costco dipped originally, notice how it never dipped below the 20-day moving average. It bounced on top of that and it continued upwards. That's mainly because of that same chart setup of, hey, we have this rolling indicator set right here. This is our, simple moving averages that kind of work on past trend in comparison to, say, an exponential moving average, where those are more of like a right now kind of indicator. I use the simple moving averages just to kind of give me an idea of here's where the stock can go or has been. And so that's just kind of how I decided to utilize that personally. And so we had that bounce right here, and overall the stock fired to the upside long. Right now we currently have a reversal to the downside on Costco, but I don't think that we'll end up seeing Costco move too much further down. I think Costco has a long ways upwards to go, but that's at least as how it sits right now. That said, overall, I'm pretty much just looking for those crossover events. Those are the main things that you should be keeping your eye out for. I think that those are basically your buy-in points. Yeah, you might be a little early or a little late, but it's more so a confirmation of the trend, and that's the most important part of actually using this indicator set and this system of trading. So when we have that crossover event, notice that currently we're trying to cross over for MACD in terms of this hourly chart. We kind of landed right together. We have two of our lines parallel right now, and so what that means, at least the way I like to read this, is basically as, hey, we can potentially change trend, which is currently why we have a reversal to the downside in terms of the custom indicator. Because what that means when we see this two parallel lines is we're a little indecisive. We have only pushed about $1.40 from open, and that was kind of it in terms of how much, I guess, the stock had in terms of pre-market. I do put a little bit of emphasis on pre-market. I don't think that it should be left completely alone. So let's just put up JP Morgan, for example. So JP Morgan is a stock that, as of right now, is completely rocketing. I do have a small position in it in terms of shares and a few options. But overall, I think that what you're going to be looking for is, again, that MACD crossover event. And notice that we also, again, use those historic trend lines, which is the simple moving averages. Notice that yesterday we saw this huge push above the 200-day moving average. We fell back down, bounced on it, and then even in pre-market, we fell back down to it, bounced, and then we pivoted off of that 200-day moving average. So that's why today I'm pretty confident in seeing something like JP Morgan push, because now we have that historical support line of the 200-day moving average. Because even notice that when we were before this 200-day moving average, we bounced down, we hit it, and it was an overhead resistance on this hourly chart. Once we broke it, we kind of started using it as a little pivot line, and we started pushing. But you have to keep in mind that the longer the time frame, the more the chart supersedes the other time frames. So say on like a daily chart, hopefully this one has a good example, but say on the daily chart, we have this crossover event. If we can get this in a cross and we have that 9 SMA kind of catch up a little bit and push higher, we can use this almost as its own little 200-day moving average, where notice that as this stock is kind of trailing downwards, every time we touch the 9 SMA, it just keeps bouncing back down and lower and lower. And that's mainly because that, overall supersedes the previous, let's say, time frames on a bigger, just parameter for your simple moving average line. So I would supersede the 200-day moving average on a 5-minute chart with, say, like the daily chart if we were about to touch 200. And that's mainly because of that overall time frame consolidation that we have on our on our simple moving average lines. And so when you look at it, it's kind of a mixed bag. You don't know what kind of time frame you should use. That's why, again, I generally just look at 1, 5, and hourly. And then when you go to take a swing trade, you check your 4-hour charts, your daily charts, and that's because that gives you that trend idea for the next couple of days. So when you have that trend change, notice we have this crossover event right at 386 for Costco. From 386 until $400, that's a $14 increase. And we've seen Costco just continue uptrending since this crossover event. Notice our custom indicators showing a 3. And since then, it has just been kind of pushing upwards. So on top of that, you also have this bullish RSI. Notice that we're above the midline. So that's right here, and we're kind of starting to get into the overbought side. So when that happens, I typically like to say, you're trying to get a reset of RSI. And when you have that RSI reset, you see that the stock ends up pushing downwards a little bit just to make sure that we're not massively overbought. There has to be some sort of sellers, even in every push. You just have to have some sort of seller. So notice on the 1 minute chart right here, notice we smacked overbought, and then we saw that little RSI reset a little bit back below the 70 line. And then we saw it push back up again, back into overbought. Again, I don't know how high we'll see JP Morgan go. For me, at least, I would love for it to go higher, but it is currently in that overbought state in terms of a 1 minute chart and in a 5 minute chart. But when you look at it in terms of a daily chart, it's barely getting started. We're finally coming out of the oversold, which is shown right here. And one of the easiest plays you can take, honestly, is an RSI reset from oversold. So once you start seeing the stock kind of bang out oversold, you start looking at whole numbers. You see this thing bottom out at 147.5. You're trying to find that whole number. So say 147 or 148, 149. Those are all levels that you're going to want to take that stock at. Or you look at simple moving average lines where you can see, hey, at this price point, I can maybe take the stock because there's some sort of support, and then I can take it long. Or if it falls below, I'll take it short because now I have a clear path to the down or upside depending on whatever stock I'm playing and what the situation is. So what you're basically looking for is, again, those crossover events, and that's how you're setting up your profit targets. You use the simple moving average lines. But what happens when you're like way above or say way below the simple moving averages? Well, what you're going to end up doing is using those whole numbers. So one major thing that I've been trading is Costco. Costco has had the gravity line of 400. That's a brand new all-time high for Costco. It's simply just a whole number. And I would set my profit targets as whole numbers on the way to that mark, whether it be in $2.50 increments or in $1 increments. So for Costco, I find that with my current position sizes, about 30 contracts or 35 contracts, when you have a $2.50 move, that's about 20% in terms of a win. So I'm trying to grab those $2.50 moves, and that's how I set my profit targets because I already am aware of how the stock plays. And that's just something that you get out of experience. And that's, I play JP Morgan. I know that every dollar makes me about 30% in terms of a win. Or Costco, every $2.50 is a 20% win. And that's like a 1% move on the stock. So when you have that knowledge of, I need this stock to move XYZ amount to make XYZ, profit, it's a really good thing to have in terms of just knowledge in your arsenal. And so when you have JP Morgan say move from 156.5 up to almost 155, I'll even set an alert for 155. I'll probably sell out of some of my stuff here, but when you have it move about $1.50, you already are aware that you can make 10%, 15% on a $1 move. And so when I go to take, say I entered at 153.5, I'll set my profit targets at, say, 50 SMA, which is 154, and then 154.5 on the 5 minute chart, which is the 200-day moving average, and then 155 because that's simply a whole number. And notice again, we have this crossover event almost on this daily chart. You would set 157 or 158 as your profit targets once you get this crossover, because once you have that, these are your overhead resistance. And so say we get this crossover event on JP Morgan, which seems to be the case pretty soon, we'll want 9 SMA to kind of catch up. And that's kind of a phrase that I use kind of often is I need I need this SMA line to catch up. What I mean by that is I need to have this thing curl in my direction. I would like for 9 SMA to start creeping upwards, because keep in mind that your simple moving averages are your floors and ceilings. And so say in terms of Costco, I would like for, if I was short on the stock, notice that we have a kind of a divergence here in terms of our simple moving average lines. If I'm short on this thing, I want the, say, 20 and 9 SMAs to catch up to the Costco stock right now. The lower we see this SMA line go, we're going to have that continuing overhead resistance for the stock. So when I take a position, say short on it, when we have that crossover, notice that MACD cross, we start seeing this thing fall. We even had a small H pattern right here. Here's our stick, here's our H. And that's another like common, little chart pattern that I like using on just a regular basis because it's one of the most simple ones you can use, but it works. I don't make the rules, but simply put, it works. And so when it comes to taking a trade, you want to keep all those things in mind. Where are the simple moving average lines? Where's the MACD? Where is RSI? Because those are all things that you should be checking on your little checklist in terms of things to look for when it comes to taking a trade. So just to recap that, you're looking at RSI in terms of how much strength does this stock have behind it, how much buyers versus sellers, or how many sellers versus buyers. If I'm short, I want more sellers. If I'm long, I want more buyers. So notice right here with the daily chart, or not the daily, the 1 minute chart for Costco, we opened up pretty strong. Notice how we were kind of in the bearish territory for it. We were below 50. So we were in this little area from 30 to 50. And then we pushed above and noticed that we had that crossover on the MACD. And then we were above the 50 mark in the 60 area. Once we started seeing that kind of decline a little bit, MACD crossed back down, RSI went back into the bearish territory, and it continued downwards. And there's that 9 SMA pushing it lower and lower. And so what you're looking for when it comes to those kinds of trades is you could have taken a scalp trade from this crossover event on the 1 minute chart. Notice that you have that hold of the 200-day moving average. You broke the 50, so now you really don't have any overhead resistance. You could have taken this $1 scalp using that whole number rule. Hey, 400 is a whole number. That's my profit target. Maybe 401 is my next profit target. And say your stop loss would be, 398 flat because that's a whole number. And if it falls below there, well, shoot, I was wrong. I got to just cut my losses here. And that's just kind of how you would go about taking a trade like that. So like right now, notice how we're kind of starting to flatten out for Costco. What I would want if I was short is to take this 9 SMA and have it continue lower because that would act as an overhead resistance. But I would want that on, say, the 5 minute chart. I would want that the 9 SMA pushes it even lower. As of right now, notice that the bid and the ask kind of jumped a little bit. So you're seeing that huge bump for Costco. And that was mainly because of that, increase of buyers. So when you have this kind of little sell-off right here, and then you have 40 go back up to 50 in terms of RSI, you have a good bit of buyers. It's still fairly neutral to bullish right now. I would want this thing to go back into the bearish territory if I was short, right around 40 or below. And that's how you would play it. So as of right now, say if I were in Costco short, if it broke above, say 399, which is now above the simple moving averages, I would cut my losses because at that point it has broken my setup. Or say if MACD were to cross back up on the 5 minute chart. So notice we tried to cross up and then it kind of failed and went back down. You would want this thing to cross up to kind of confirm that uptrend. Otherwise, you are now playing against the trend. And trend is your friend, so you never want to be playing against it because that's how you lose. That's how you blow up an account. That's how you take a massive loss on a trade that you don't need to take. So overall, that's kind of just how you want to go about taking really any trade. That's just, I guess, the small refresher here on how to do things. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. But pretty much that's all you're looking at when it comes to taking a trade. Obviously, there's various different indicators you can use. I'm currently experimenting using the VWAP. But as of right now, I need to work a little more with it. So that would be like, instead of using simple moving averages, I would use the VWAP. And basically what you're trying to get with is, say, a 1 minute or a 5 minute chart. And you're going to use that as your simple moving averages instead to kind of give you an idea of levels. So let me just put up Costco. Costco yesterday, that's a 15 minute chart. Costco yesterday was in the bullish side of the VWAP. So notice the middle line, that's our 0. And pretty much the entire day was spent on the upper side of it, meaning that people were generally pretty bullish. And then when you look at RSI was very bullish yesterday. So overall, I would be pretty inclined to take a position long yesterday. As soon as I saw this 1 minute chart, notice that we bounced on the bottom support right here. This is, I want to say like what, 395 and a half. We broke back above the 0, which is that, again, neutral zone. And we had that, let's say, MACD crossover, and then we kind of stuck around the bullish side of this MACD for the rest of the day. So that's kind of how I would use like MACD in terms of my current, indicator set. Tommy asks, will this be posted on YouTube? Yeah, I'm going to post it with a private link, and you guys can check it out in case you missed any parts, or so you can listen to it again. But yeah, that's kind of just how you would go about taking a trade with VWAP. And I'm currently experimenting with that just to kind of back test and see, can I make this thing work in terms of my indicator set? Because my trading style is different from, say, CJ's, or different from, Dusty. They're all very different trading styles, but it's what we found works for us. And at the end of the day, you need to find something that works for you and something that you can stick to and that you understand. You need to have a system in place for your trades, because that's what you'll find leads to your success. There's a reason why McDonald's is able to hire very young people to fill the job, because they have a system in place to take their positions. Just like how we're taking positions here, because we have a MACD cross, a bullish RSI, and say support on an SMA line. It's the same as, here's the process of handling a customer, or selling something to, selling something as like a salesman for a dealership or something. It's really just have a system in place to take your trades. And so notice again, we have that 9 SMA right here catching up to this current 1 minute chart for Costco. We're currently forming an H pattern. This is a massive H. If it were to fall below 397.8, we'll probably see Costco touch this bottom VWAP. Once we get below there, your profit target would probably be the 5-day, 200-day moving average, which is at 396.8. And we're currently sitting right on that level, and notice that bid and ask are already allowing for that to be a bottom move. So when it comes to Costco, at least, what I like to note is that when we see that bid and ask kind of sit around a specific level, or say I see bid kind of fall, I'm now inclined to believe that, hey, this next tick is going to be lower. And it kind of gives you a small foresight into what this candle could turn into for, say, a 1 minute chart or a 5 minute chart. So notice right here, it's 0.77. Oh, it already, yeah, exactly. There's the H pattern break. So it was 0.77, and then the bid dumped all the way down to 0.5. So when the stock sits at 0.74, the high is 0.77, but the bid is 0.5, there's a high likelihood that we'll see this next tick be a down tick. And that's kind of what we ended up just seeing right there. So overall, it's just being literate with your charts, and again, having that system in place of how you're going to take a trade, why you're taking a trade, and overall just having that trust in your indicator set of, here's why I'm taking it, here's why it's going to go in my favor. Overall, I think that is just the more important side of trading. You just have to be very methodical with your trades and be very cognizant of when to stop out as well. And that's what I'll probably cover on my next lesson. That'll be psychology in trading, and how to cut losses, how to set stop losses, where to take profit, FOMO, and stuff like that. That said, I will conclude that lesson there. I appreciate you guys all for tuning in and listening. It is something that I think is very important, especially just in general, that is one of the most important things you can do as a trader is have a system. So I'm hoping that even if you took anything from this lesson is have the system in place, because that is going to be what helps you find success.